In fact, in a few weeks, we're going to be starting a new series in a few weeks on parenting. It's going to be called Parenting Things. Not Stranger Things, Parenting Things. Now, parenting is Stranger Things. We understand that because kids are strange. But it's going to be really a series about how we can parent in today's world. But today we're not talking about fear in the family. We're talking about really fear when it comes to finances. 72% of economists expect a U.S. recession sometime in the middle of next year. And that's a lot of them. They're not very convinced that the Fed can get inflation back down without causing a recession. In case you're not sure what a recession is, a recession is a decline in economic activity for a period of time. Technically, it's when the gross domestic product shrinks for 2 quarters in a row. It's like a series of dominoes that fall down and cause a chain of events. You got things like inflation and high interest rates and job loss. They all fall down and cause kind of an economic spiral downward. But not only are economists talking about this, you also have consumers that are concerned. In fact, the Wall Street Journal article came out this past week on the Consumer Sentiment Index, which basically is an economic indicator that measures how confident consumers are in their own finances and in the finances of our American economy. And you can see how low it is. In fact, it's lower now, as you can see on the screen, than it was in the early days of COVID. In fact, during all of COVID, during the high unemployment time, people are just not very confident. It's lower now than it was in 2007, 2008, 2009, during the mortgage crisis, the Great Recession. There's not a whole lot of economic confidence. Whether you have experts or you have just normal people like you and I, isn't a lot of confidence. And so people are really concerned about this whole idea of recession. So the question is, what do we do in light of all of this? Well, at our church, at Life Church, we have different values. And one of our values is transformation. And by transformation, we mean that we really believe that Jesus Christ wants to transform each and every one of us to be more like Jesus. In every area of our lives. It's a lifelong process. And part of that is in our finances. And so today we're starting a series called Recession Proof. And it's a series about getting our finances in order. We cannot predict the future, but we can plan for the future. And we can do some things to recession-proof our lives. In fact, if you have your app, you can open it up. You'll see basically, it'll take you on the homepage, you see the Recession Proof logo. You can click on that. It'll take you to this website, which is yourlifechurch.org. You also can go to that. If you don't have the app, on the screen here you'll see it. You can actually scan the QR code there, and you can actually get to this site as well. These are the 3 ways you can be involved during this series. Number 1 is simply just come on Sundays to get a biblical foundation where we'll talk about biblical direction for our finances. The second thing is you go to the link here, you see the link right above the number 2 where it says click here to sign up for Ramsey Plus. You can click there, and our church is paying for you to actually take this, to have access to Ramsey Plus. Dave Ramsey is one of the most trusted financial advisors in America, and when you click on that, you'll fill out a brief form, set up an account, set up your profile, and you are ready to go, and you're in Ramsey Plus with all the tools. And because we believe that life change happens best in relationships, number 3 is Financial Peace University. And so with Ramsey Plus, there are a bunch of Financial Peace University classes you can take, and those are going to start next week. And so I encourage you to think about getting into one of those, because Sunday morning will give you biblical principles, but it's these groups that will give you the encouragement you need to take a step forward and make progress. And so, and if you scroll down a little further, even under this, you'll see where it says share this with a friend. You can share this good news with friends, with family, with coworkers, with neighbors. You can give this code away that we're paying for, so even your friends can be recession proof. When you actually get into Ramsey Plus, it looks kind of like this. And so my library, my money, my team, Under my library, that's where it says my courses. This is what you're going to see. The very first one is Financial Peace University. You hit start, and you can actually join one of the classes that we have set up here. And there are different nights of the week. And again, I encourage you to get into one. It's just going to be about 2 months. You got to get into one to balance the Sunday morning, make an investment in your financial future, and do that. And if you actually scroll down a little further under all of these classes, you're going to see other classes under the Financial Peace University class on budgeting, retiring student loan debt, credit card debt, getting out of that, talking or teaching your kids about money. There's a bunch of good classes under this Financial Peace University one. You also can hit that Explore button right there, and there's all kinds of videos you can watch. Videos that talk about all kinds of things, from talking to your spouse about money, to how to build an emergency fund, to how to get out of debt faster, the basics on investing, and on and on and on. This is tools that we're paying for you to actually get your finances in better order, and this is a great opportunity for you. And of course, that's all under my library. Under my money in the middle, that's where all the tools are. You can set up your own budget in there, your own debt repayment schedule, all these kinds of things. This is your own account. No one sees it but you. There's full privacy. But this is a tool you can use by one of the most trusted names in finance in America to help learn how to get things in order. And so I encourage you guys for the next 2 months to get into an FPU group, to move forward. Let's all gather around this idea of living a bold life together in Jesus Christ, around the idea of biblical stewardship, so we can live in faith and not fear, right? We cannot predict the future, but we can plan for it and be more ready for it, so we're going to help you do that. And I realize that it's a sensitive subject when you talk about money. It can be very tense, and I totally understand that. I get that. Some of you might be barely making it. Some of you, you might be in the depths of debt right now. The song you sing every day is, I owe, it's off to work I go. And that's how some of you live, right? It's like, and I get it. It can be a tense subject, but listen, it also can be liberating. You can, in 2 months, if you really put yourself to this, come on Sundays, get an FPU group. I've been through it twice, and I'm telling you, every time I've been through it, I've learned something new. My finances got a little healthier every single time. I encourage you to get into it. If you've already been through FPU, do it again. I'm going to do it a third time. Why? Because we're called to make disciples. And I can encourage someone next to me maybe who's not quite as far along maybe as I am. And we can all use some financial fine-tuning, right? All of us can use that, so get involved in this. Now, why are we doing all this? Here's why we're doing this. Surely something as important as finances, surely God has something to say about that. Wouldn't you think that? And God would have something to say. And the Bible has a whole lot to say about money and possessions. Of the 38 parables Jesus gave, 16 deal with finances or money in some way or another. Jesus talked more about finances and possessions. He ever talked about heaven or hell combined. In the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 1 out of every 10 verses is about finances or possessions. Right? The Bible has roughly 500 verses on prayer, less than 500 verses on faith, but over 2,000 verses on finances and possessions. Our relationship with our finances and our possessions is so important that we need to talk about that, because the Bible does not ignore the importance of money and possessions. Rather, it challenges and goes head on, eyes open, no holds barred, and faces the reality of it. And because we believe the Bible at our church and teach the Bible and believe it's the final source of authority for all belief and behavior, we're going to do the same thing. And we're going to jump into it and see what God says. The last time I did a whole series on finances was in November of 2009. We were still a portable church, not even on this property. So it's been a while. So I think with a pending recession ahead of us, possibly, it's time to roll up our sleeves and get into this once again, because Jesus has something to say. 2,000 years ago, on a mountainside near Capernaum in the region of Galilee in Israel, Jesus gives the most famous sermon in human history called the Sermon on the Mount. And in this sermon, he says in Luke chapter 12, verse 22, Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. He commands them. This is a command, not a suggestion. Do not worry about your life. And he goes on to talk about what he means by that. Don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear. Don't worry about material matters. You could say, don't worry about possessions. Don't worry about finances. Don't worry about material things. And it's interesting, he says, do not worry about those things. So if Jesus says that, then the question is, why do we have such financial fear? Why do we worry so much about material things? Jesus says, don't worry about these kinds of things. What's very interesting, he says then, right? Then Jesus said, therefore I tell you, do not worry. Then, therefore, do not worry. What he's doing is, he's basically saying, based on what I just told you, based on all the stuff I just said, then, therefore, now, don't worry about these things. You say, well, what did he just say that set up the statement, do not worry? Well, that's a good question. We're going to backtrack for a little bit this morning, and we're here in verse 22. We're going to backtrack to verse 15 and see why Jesus tells us not to have financial fear. In verse 15, some two brothers walk up to Jesus. They're arguing about the inheritance. They're fighting over daddy's money. And Jesus, in response to their argument, says in verse 15, he said to them, these brothers, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Two commands. Watch out, right? Beware. Second command is, he says, guard against it. Guard yourself against it. Watch out. Beware. Beware of what? What's the warning? What should I guard myself against? Should I watch out that I might lose money? That's not what he says. Not that you might lose money. He said, beware of something. There's something greater than losing money. Beware of this, he says, against all kinds of greed, covetousness, the consuming thoughts, the idea. He says, watch out. He says, don't be consumed by all your possessions and all your money. He said, guard against that. It comes in many forms, he says. And why do we not have to? Why should we guard and watch out for this? He says, because life does not consist in abundance of possessions. Life's not really about that, he said. And let's be honest, all right? We all love Jesus, right? Can I say that in the church service, right? How many of you love Jesus? Or a few of you do. That's great. All right, okay, that's great. Can I be honest? We all love Jesus, but we're talking about money. Let's just be truthful. We all love him. We just don't all believe him. We love him. We just don't believe him. He says life is not about the abundance of possessions, but we actually believe it is. Too often we believe that life equals stuff. Life equals stuff. To live life is to have all this stuff. Now you might say, I don't believe that. You might say that with your lips, but our lives betray us. There's something about us. We are always striving for stuff. This is how we keep score. This is how we keep score. We keep score by getting stuff. Now, scores are important, right? Scores define reality. If you're late to a game, the first question you ask is, what's the score? You want to know what the reality is. All of us are scorekeepers in one way or another. Yesterday, if you're an Aggie fan or a Longhorn fan, you're upset about the score, right? We all know about scores. Football players add up touchdowns, and poker players collect chips, and basketball players count shots. Students rack up GPAs and SAT scores. But when you play Monopoly, you score with money. I remember as a kid playing Monopoly. Oh, I liked getting all the houses, right? I liked getting all these hotels. I could get a car as a kid. I can even get a ship, right? And what my favorite part about Monopoly always was playing with the money. How many of y'all did that as kids, huh? I mean, before the days of hip-hop, right, I was making it rain. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm old, by the way. I'm that old. But anyway, so I'm making it rain, and I was the original OG, right, the original gangster. I was loving playing Monopoly because I like all these bills. You know, the ones are okay, but I really like the hundreds, and my favorite bill is the 500, right? And I would have it in my hand, and I would play, and I had all this money, and I had houses, right? And I had cars and boats and hotels, and when you play Monopoly, the way you win is through acquisition. It's all about acquiring. You spend all you have to acquire more stuff, more real estate, and it's all about the one who wins is the one who gets the most. The way you win Monopoly is by getting stuff. And most of us live our lives playing Monopoly. We keep score by how much stuff we collect and how much stuff we gather. But here's the problem. If life is about stuff and we lose our stuff, what happens to our life? If life's about stuff and we lose our stuff, what happens to our lives? We live in financial fear because to lose stuff is to lose life. That's why we're afraid. Jesus says, don't be afraid, he says. Life is not about the abundance of stuff. But we believe life is about getting stuff, and that's why we're financially fearful. We don't want to lose our stuff, then we'll lose our life. And we know something is wrong. Even though Jesus says life does not consist in abundance of possessions. If you are consumed with stuff, you will always live in financial fear. Why? Because money is vulnerable. Have you ever noticed that? We live in fear because it's fleeting. Proverbs 23:5, your money can be gone in a flash. Anybody ever been there? As if it had grown wings and flown away like an eagle. Have you ever noticed on the back of a $1 bill, there's an eagle with wings? It just kind of flies away, right? How many that's happened to you before? It's like, I thought I had it, but now in a flash, in a glance, it's actually gone. Jesus says, that's what happens to us. We're fearful because we know it's fleeting. And we base our life on it, and when it's gone, what life do we have? Once upon a time in the Crystal Falls neighborhood of Leander, Texas, there lived a very important man. He lived in a really nice house. He had the best cars for his wife and himself. And he had a nice pool in the backyard. And every once in a while, he would go on vacation. He usually sent his wife on the best vacations. He didn't go a lot because this man was a workaholic. And he was consumed by work, working 12 to 14-hour days. And it was not just his occupation. Work was his preoccupation. From time to time, his wife would tell him, you're working too many hours, you need to slow down. And he was vaguely aware that his kids were growing up and he was missing the best moments of their lives. Every once in a while, he would think, and he would tell his wife, hey, I'll spend more time with you and I'll spend more time with the kids when things settle down. He was going 100 miles an hour. He went to see his doctor. His doctor told him, you got to slow down. You got to eat better, and you have to work out, get in shape. And he knew he needed to, and he figured he would one day when things settled down. His wife would nag him about the need to go to church. She came to Life Church with her kids, but he never came with her. And he did not realize his soul was starving for God, but he knew he probably should. And he said, I promise I will, honey, one day when things settle down. And work was growing, and everything is going up and to the right, and things were going so well, and the demand was great, and so they had to expand the company and buy new properties and make things bigger, make things better, and he had to work more hours, and he promised his wife, I'll take you on a nice vacation one day. I just got to get over this hump. One day things will settle down. He was busy being the master of the board. He was collecting, acquiring. He was making everything happen. And he was in control of it all. One night it's 11 p.m. and he's in his study downstairs, and his wife says, I'm going up to bed. Are you coming? He said, no, I'm going to work a little longer. And she goes on up, and he's working and putting the final touches on one final acquisition, the big one. This is going to make a lot more money, and it's going to double the company. And he is the master of the board, in charge of everything except for one microscopic detail. He was not in control of an artery. And there he is working his computer. His heart is pumping 14,000 pints each day, 100,000 beats every 24 hours. And then in a moment, when he's about to make the deal, his heart skips a beat. Then it skips a second beat and a third beat. And for a split second, he has the gift of clarity. And he realizes just for the moment that even though he's the master of the board, he cannot even control his own pulse. Now it's 3 a.m. and his wife wakes up and she wonders where he is, and she goes downstairs and finds him in the study, head down on his arm, and she says, gosh, he fell asleep in front of the computer. He's like a child. She's so frustrated with her husband. And she goes to wake him, but his body is cold when she touches his shoulder. Calls 911, but it's too late. He had been dead for hours, a massive coronary. They have a funeral. The funeral comes around, and the obituary is in Community Impact. They even made the Austin American Statesman, and it's too bad he's dead because they said all kinds of nice things about him. They have the service, and people file by, and they always said the same thing. They said the same thing people always say at funerals. He looks so peaceful. Well, rigor mortis will do that for you. It's death. Death is nature's way of saying you need to slow down. People also ask the same question. They always ask when a rich person dies, how much did he leave? And the answer is all of it. They eulogized him as a leading entrepreneur of his day, all the civic achievements he had done, and they put a big gravestone there at his grave, and on it they wrote the words leader and innovator and visionary, and at the very top they wrote success. They bury him, they go home, but late in the night, unseen and unheard, an angel of the Lord walks over to this tombstone, and with the finger, the angel traces a word out over all the other words. And the word is fool. Fool. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Jesus told them that. You cannot live for stuff. And then he goes on and Jesus tells a parable in Luke 12:16. He told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it would be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. The assessment Jesus gave of this man was he was a fool. Didn't say he was an evil man, didn't say he was a wicked man, but he was a foolish man. Why such harsh language? Because of all his entrepreneurial brilliance, he still believed in some myths. The man in the story foolishly believed certain things that are not true. And one of them is this: more will be enough. He believed more would be enough. Even though Jesus said life does not consist in the abundance of possessions, he talked about the abundant harvest. He talked about tearing down his barns and building bigger ones and storing surplus grain. He was always into the total reorganizing things, tearing down barns, building bigger barns. He wanted one more barn, one more crop, one more harvest. He wanted more. He believed that life equals stuff. He believed in the myth of more. And that's how he kept score. And we keep score the same way. We keep score by comparing ourselves to other people, keeping up with the Joneses. It's rarely a conscious activity, but all of us don't do it intentionally, but there's always subtle pressure that we have that weakens our financial disciplines because we're looking at how other people are living their lives and thinking, if they've got that stuff, I should have that stuff too. That's how we keep score, the myth of more. The more will be enough. And so we compare ourselves to, we compete with, we climb over, and we collect more. King Solomon was probably one of the richest men who's ever lived. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 5:10, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And he would know. Never has enough, never satisfied. As income increases, so do expenses. The more you make, the more you spend. It is the American dream. It's all about acquiring. Life equals stuff. And through acquisition, you get satisfaction, but it is simply not true. He wanted more and more and more. Now, you and I don't know what that's like, do we? We don't know what it's like to have full closets, full attics, full garages, and full sheds, do we? In fact, 25% of all two-car garages contain no cars. Do you know why 25% of two-car garages in America have no cars? Because they're filled with stuff. They're filled with stuff. I like what comedian George Carlin said. He says, a house is just a pile of stuff with a cover on it. And what happens when our attics and our sheds and our closets and our garages are full? What happens is we go get self-storage units, right? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I know some of you want to confess right now. I'm sure it's some of you, right? Do you know how many self-storage units there were in the 1960s? You might want to give us your guess. In the 1960s, you know how many there were in America? 0. None. And now in a very short amount of time, there are nearly 50,000 of them. For perspective, that's more than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. That's how many self-storage units there are in America. Over 1 billion square feet of space. There is 7.3 square feet of storage space in these self-storage units. 7.3 feet of square foot space for every man, woman, and child in America. We could all physically, each one of us, every American, could go into a storage place. We could all get into a room, and we'd be under the canopy of the self-storage unit. It would house all of us. It's the fastest growing segment of the commercial real estate industry. Nearly $40 billion a year, more than the music industry. It is the myth of more. That more will be enough. That I just need more stuff. And how do we pay for this stuff? Well, we do it by charging it, right? We do it with the plastic people eaters, right? Right? With the plastic piranhas. Right. This is how we pay for stuff, right? And did you know that in 1958, American Express invented the first credit card? You had to pay it off every month. Then Visa came along and says, we have an idea. You don't have to pay it off every month. We'll just charge you interest. And so in 1958, the first credit card was made, and now today, 64 years later, there are 365 million accounts open in our country. There are 3.8 credit cards for every single American. The average American household has a credit card balance of $5,300, $890 billion collectively. And you say, well, Pastor, I only use my card because I don't have enough income. I don't have enough income, Pastor. That's why I use my card. Interesting, I found this stat before COVID, pre-COVID, because COVID was crazy. In 2019, the median annual income in Greater Austin, that includes us, was $80,000 compared to $65,000 nationally. So Austin, people in the Austin area, we make more money than most people do nationally. And yet, Austin had more consumer debt per person than any other city in the country. We make more money than anybody else, or we have more money than most people do in our country, and yet we still have more debt. It's not about how much you make, it's about how much we spend. And it's really important. That's why this Financial Peace University is so important. It will help you get grips and handles on income and spending. 33% of people said, I use my credit card when I have a need. Right? A need. And I've been there. I've had broken cars, right? Cars break down. You don't have the cash. You slide a card, right? That's why Financial Peace University is so important. You'll learn how to build an emergency fund so you can avoid doing that when the car breaks down. This is very important. 33% of us use this when we have a need. But interesting, in the same survey, that's 33% when we have a need. The same survey found out that 44% of us said we use it not when we have a need, but when we have a greed. 44% said, I don't need it, I just want it. I don't have the money for it, so I charge it. These are all things we need to look at, right? The rite of passage for young people used to be, I got a job. Now it is, I got a credit card, right? It's changed. And we think we need more and more stuff. Ecclesiastes 2:10, Solomon once again, I deny myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. And yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. One of the richest persons who ever lived said, I thought life was about stuff, but I realized it really was meaningless. More is meaningless. It's the myth of more. More will be enough. And we think that. More will be enough. That's what this rich fool believed. Second thing he believed is things will settle down. He says, take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry, right? He really believed things would settle down. How many times have we said it, when things settle down? My wife always gets on me. It's one of my phrases. Well, things will slow down. Things will settle down. We always think that things are going to settle down. Things are going to slow down. But what if things don't slow down? Things are not going to slow down by themselves. That's why he was called a fool. He thought they would slow down by themselves. They never slow down by themselves. Proverbs 6:4 says, don't put it off, do it now. Don't rest until you do. Save yourself like a gazelle escaping from a hunter, like a bird fleeing from a net. The proverb writer says, if you know you need to do something, don't wait for the perfect opportunity. It's not going to happen. Do it now. Treat it with urgency, like a gazelle running from a hunter, like a bird running from a net. Treat the important thing as an urgent thing. Do it now. When is a good time to get your finances in order? Never. It's never a good time. So when should you do it? Now. Don't say when things settle down, I'll get things in order. It's never going to happen. And so we do it. If we know it needs to be done, it's important. We also make it urgent, and we do it now. He thought more would be enough. He thought things would settle down. More would never be enough, and things would never settle down. But he also thought death will not come. Death will not come. Now, surely he knew that he would die, but the whole point is he didn't live like he was going to die. He was called a fool. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. If he were to list out all of his priorities, this rich fool would have the priority list like this. Have a big harvest, right? Get bigger barns, achieve financial security, eat, drink, be merry, and remember not to die. He didn't want to think about dying. He wasn't even thinking about that. And that's why he's called a fool, because of all his entrepreneurial brilliance, all of his cost-benefit analysis, all of his cash flow projections, all of his preparing for every possible contingency. He did not prepare for the one thing that is ultimately inevitable, and that is his death. He was the master of the board, preparing for every possible scenario, but did not prepare for the fact that the game actually would end. The game will end. And he never asked the question, then what? When I'm done collecting the money, when I'm done collecting the cars and the houses, then what will happen when the game ends? Hebrews 9:27 says, people are destined to die once. After that, to face judgment. We get one life, and we are destined, every one of us, to die. Psalm 90, verse 12, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. If we number our days, know they are numbered, we'll live more wisely. Revelation 14:13, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. When this game ends, the only way to win it is not just by collecting all the money, but when life ends, the way to win it and the way to be blessed is to be in the Lord. This guy was the master of the game, but he lost in life. The master of collecting stuff, but stuff is not life. And he lost in life because he did not know God. Do you know God today? There you go. Amen. We have one. I know you're busy and you're trying to make a living. You're trying to pay bills. You're on the go. I get it. But you cannot forget that in the end, there is an end in this game. And we all need to be prepared to stand before God. The only way to be blessed is to die in the Lord. That means you know Jesus Christ as your Savior and Lord. Is he your Savior? Is he your Lord? He lived like he was not going to die. And the last really fallacy he had was he believed that stuff will go with me. Now again, I'm sure he didn't really believe that, but he sure lived like that. And Jesus even said, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? In other words, who's going to get what you left behind? When you're done playing this game, you move off and someone else plays with the money. Someone else plays with the house and the hotel and the car. Someone else plays with this after you're done playing with it because it stays and you go. He thought his problem was he had too much stuff and no place to put it. But his real problem was he thought he was going to take it with him, or at least he lived like that. Job 1:21, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. I did not have this stuff in birth. I will not have this stuff in death. Psalm 49:16, do not be overawed when others grow rich, when the splendor of their houses increases, for they will take nothing with them when they die. Their splendor will not descend with them. You don't take it with you. All the funerals I've done, I've never seen a U-Haul behind a hearse, right? It just doesn't happen that way. Ecclesiastes 2:18, I hated all the things I had told for under the sun. Why did he say I hated all these things? Because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. I got all this stuff. I was a master of the game, but I can't even take it with me. I got to leave it for somebody else because I can't take it. 1 Timothy 6:7, we brought nothing into the world. We'll take nothing out of it. It all stays here. When I was a kid playing Monopoly, there would come that point where my mom would say, okay, the game's over. So I had to remember that the game was going to end, but I also had to remember something else. I had to remember how the game was going to end. She would say, okay, the game's over, and I knew what that meant. What that meant was the hotel had to go back, and the car had to go back, and the boat had to go back, and the houses had to go back, and all of this money that I like so much, and I love playing with it, it all had to go back. It all had to go back. And what I learned a long time ago is no matter how much stuff I acquire, it all goes back in the box. Not only does the game end, we remember how the game ends. All the stuff we labor for and work for, it all goes back in the box. Hotels and houses, railroads and utility companies, property like Boardwalk and Park Place, all the money, it goes back in the box. You might be the master of the board, but when it's all said and done, it goes all back into the box. Players come and players go, and in between that, it always goes back in the box. In Luke 12:21, after Jesus called this man a fool, he tells us why. He says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Then Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, for life is more than, and he lists all these things, all these material things. Jesus tells us that life is more than stuff. Don't worry about all these things. Life does not consist of the abundance of possessions. Life is not stuff. Life is more than stuff. This stuff will all go back in the box, but that's not what life is. In fact, if you sit around in the verse there, verse 21, he says, we should be rich toward God. And that's why he called him a fool. He called him a fool because he was not rich toward God. It's breathtakingly simple. To be rich toward God is the goal of life. The goal of life is to be rich toward God. The goal of life is not to acquire a bunch of stuff, even though it's okay to acquire things. It's okay to play the game. It's okay to play the game well, but that's not the goal of life. The goal of life is to be rich toward God. What does that even mean? Simply put, it means this. Being rich toward God is making the temporary servant to the eternal. Making the temporary servant to the eternal. We'll be rich toward ourselves or rich toward God, depending on how we handle the temporary things in life. If this stuff is the servant, we're rich toward God. If this stuff is the master, we're poor toward God. Oftentimes, what happens is we get it flipped. Oftentimes, we take this stuff and we begin serving it. It becomes our master. This becomes our master, and God becomes our servant. God, give me this. Give me a car. Give me a house. Give me more money. God, you're my servant. This stuff's my master. I need more of it. But part of recession-proofing our lives is flipping the script and making sure the temporary is always the servant, not the master of the eternal. Temporary is all the stuff that goes back in the box. The eternal is the stuff that's going with me when I die. The temporary is the stuff. The eternal is God and people. This is why Jesus says the greatest commandment is what? To love what? God and love who? People. Because God and people are the only two things that are eternal. They're the only two things you take with you into the next life. All the stuff is temporary. It stays here. It goes back into the box. This is how God keeps score. This is how God keeps score. What I do for God and what I do for others is the only thing that's eternal. God and people. It's how he keeps score. It's kind of like having a temporary sticky. You know, you go through life and you start thinking about everything that's temporary. If it's stuff, it's temporary, right? It's going to be temporary, right? And so you look around, you go, where are some, oh, here it is. This microphone's temporary, right? Oh, well, even that was temporary. Okay. Guitar is temporary, right? Drums are temporary, right? All this stuff is temporary. Every bit of it's temporary. You got a cell phone right there. Is that a nice cell phone? That's great. It's temporary. All right, there you go. All right, here. You got car keys? Who has car keys? Anybody has car keys? If I'm going to take your car? You have that car keys? Those are the glasses. All right, car keys. Your car is temporary, right? Who has a wallet? Now you guys are getting nervous, right? Who has a wallet? Okay. Who's got a wallet? Yeah, okay. Your wallet? It's nice, but it's temporary, right? All these things are going to be temporary. Everything that your house, your car, all this stuff is temporary. And if you can go through life realizing all these material things are temporary, that's great. But what has to happen is all the temporary things in life has to be trumped by the eternal things. By the eternal things. And you know what's eternal? God and people, right? And that means, hey, sweetie, you're eternal. I love you. You're eternal even, all right? You're eternal, right? You're eternal. I don't have enough stickies. All right, here we go. You're eternal. Every person you meet in this world is eternal, right? You're eternal. Come here, Naomi. You're eternal. There you go. All right. When we give our attention to God and people, when they become our priority, then all the temporary things become servants to God and people. Unfortunately, we will use people who are eternal to get things that are temporary. But we're not going to do that anymore, are we? Part of recession proofing is saying, I'm going to allow the temporary things to serve the eternal things. Jesus said in Matthew 6:24, you cannot serve both God and money. You cannot serve both eternal things and temporary things, God and money. You have to choose. This series is about encouraging us, yes, we need the temporary things to live. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with playing the game. But let's make sure we know it ends and we know how it ends. And we make sure the temporary things serve the eternal things, God and people. Is that good? We're going to do that. Let's pray. God, today we pray, Lord, as you begin this series, that you would help us to focus in the right way. All the things that consume us, they overwhelm us, and yet they're temporary. Our spouse is not temporary. Our kids are not temporary. Our neighbors, our friends, these are all eternal. God, forgive us for making the temporary things the master. Today we say that we are going to let the temporary things not be the master, but be the servant of the eternal, of God and people. And we'll take a step forward in recession-proofing our lives. I pray for our church, Father, you'd help us to come on Sundays, help us get involved in FPU groups, that we might be assertive and take initiative get our financial house in order, that we might make all the material things we have be servants to you and to others. Father, help us not to be overwhelmed by the storms that come. Help us have vision to see clearly who you are, that our help comes from you, that we have wisdom you've given us to separate the eternal from the temporary. We praise in Jesus' name.